We're going to be discussing the essence of the conversation is really we thought we had certain freedoms. We thought we had certain guaranteed freedoms. Now, Pastor Art, he's up in Canada. Obviously, we're here in the United States. Okay, we can't take our freedoms for granted. You would think freedom of speech, okay, freedom of religion. Well, now it's all hate speech. Right, but I'm not going to be too long-winded because we want to jump right in. Just a quick introduction. Most of you out there know Pastor Art because he stood up. He went into the breach. He stood up to defend his flock, to defend his church. Okay, he said no to the Canadian government, right? And he's paying a price for it. And the fact is, quick bio: he is a well-known advocate for the poor and the homeless. He is a Canadian clergyman and civil and human rights activist. Pastor Artur Pawlowski, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, our friend.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Excellent. I'm going to hand it over to Joe Resinello.
Pastor Art, you grew up under a communist regime. I mean, you saw soldiers with machine guns, tanks on the streets, and the people rose up in Poland in 1981. I go to a Polish American church in my hometown. I knew a gentleman. He was a doctor. He told me his parents were professors during that time. His parents had to have a soldier with a gun stay in his house. I mean, Americans have no concept of things like that. I mean, imagine, you have a wife, you have children, and a man is living in your house with a gun. I mean, this is the type of situation that you lived under. This is the type of situation my friend lived under. How does that experience compare to what you are seeing right now in Canada as it escalates?
Well, more than that, as you can tell very quickly, I am a Polish immigrant. Not only I grew up behind the Iron Curtain under the boots of the Soviets, I grew up in Poland. I grew up in a city that had a concentration camp from the Nazi era. So my country, I mean, everywhere you looked, when I was growing up, there were bullet holes. I grew up in a city with a concentration camp. As kids, we were playing in a bunkers of the SS. I mean, the history is left and right. And history of what? History of certain people that decided that they're going to be the today's pharaohs. And then the rest of the people will be just, well, they will own nothing and they will be eating crickets, riding a bicycle, and they will have nothing and they will be happy, just like we're seeing today. So nothing is new under the sun, the Bible says. What we have experienced during the Nazi era and before that, of course, Ottoman Empire, Genghis Khan, Roman Empire, Babylonians, Persians, Egyptians. I mean, nothing is new. You will always have a certain group of people that just want to wipe you out. And if you dare to disagree with them, well, then your family will be wiped out as well. And that's what the Nazis did. That's what the communists still do. I mean, it's not over. Tell that to the North Koreans or Chinese. We in 1980, when the Polish people took it to the streets, many were shot and thousands, tens of thousands were arrested. But finally, the Polish people said, enough, it's enough. I mean, we don't want to live like this. We don't want to live under the boots of anyone. And then finally, they came together. And that's the key. They united under the solidarity movement, solidarity with each other, doctors in solidarity with the construction workers, nurses in solidarity with the police officers that just hated the regime. And they said, we will no longer work for you. And for that, solidarity movement was outlawed. And for that, people were arrested and many were murdered. My wife was distributing or smuggling, if you will, a solidarity pamphlet. If you were caught with just one solidarity pamphlet, there was 1 year of imprisonment. If you were listening to a European radio, so anything outside of the Soviet bloc, 5 years mandatory prison, of course, after you were beaten, tortured without mercy. So I grew up in an environment like that. I've seen corruption at the highest level. I've seen bribery left and right. That's how the whole system operates. You always had to carry something with you because the whole system was so corrupted to the core. Well, 1980, 81, 82 came. Solidarity was outlawed. 1 million people joined in 1980. When the government said this is illegal, 3 million people joined. And then they took it to the streets, and then the rest is history. The Iron Curtain was broken, the Berlin Wall collapsed, and Europe got its freedom. Poland in 1989 had its first democratic election after the invasion of the Nazis and then later in 45 takeover of the Soviets. So I grew up in that, seeing this in front of my eyes. It's not that when I'm sharing my story, I'm telling you a nice Hollywood production. I'm telling you, I've seen this movie before. If you do not change the script, you're going to cry. This movie does not end well. It's a horror movie. It's
Well,
not the tragic.
Pastor, let me ask you this, because I could hear the voices out there already. Okay, I could hear people out there already. What they're saying: how could you compare the Canadian government? And let's keep it with Canada and America, because they're both doing the same damn thing. Okay. In other words, you're talking about the protocols that were imposed during the pandemic, okay, and you were railing against them. And I was like, well, how could you compare us to Soviets and Nazis? We're just trying to keep people safe and healthy.
Well,
That's a crock. That's a lot of crock, a crock of nonsense, Pastor. I'd like for you to tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I can very easily compare what was happening under the Nazism, fascism, and communism, socialism, because they started the same way. It was all about cleaning. It was all about purity. The Jewish people were called virus, unclean. They were looking for an enemy. Now, in the 21st century, they gave us an invisible enemy, but their famous statements were always the same. Give people the enemy and they will do whatever we tell them to do. So the concept, or the modus operandi, if you will, the blueprint, how to become a tyrant, is identical. The same things: overreach government, big bureaucracy, zero accountability, no checks and balances. Officers were not following the law of the land. Do you know that when those people, those wicked, evil Gestapo, as I call them, Gestapo in the German, it was a political police. When the political police here in Canada entered my church, you know, they broke Criminal Code of Canada, section 176, 1, 2, and 3. They themselves should be charged, and there is a maximum 2 years of imprisonment for them for what they have done. They broke the law. Or simply what I did, I stood on the law. I stood on the law of God, of course, and I stood on the law of my country, the Constitution, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, international human rights, our domestic here, in the province of Alberta, human rights. The preamble to our Constitution, it says, whereas Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God and the rule of law. What we have seen in the past 3 years, God kicked out, because what God does, it brings accountability. It tells the villain that in the end of the day, you will be accountable for what you have been saying and for what you have been doing. They hate that. Every tyrant, every dictator hates accountability and checks and balances. That's why we call them tyrants. Also, the rule of law was kicked out. Those people were not following their own protocols to serve, to protect, and do no harm, as we see right now with doctors and nurses. This is tyranny. That's why I dare and I will be comparing what we have witnessed and still witnessing with the jobs and other things to Nazi Germany and to communism, Soviet Russia. Why? Because they are very similar and they are implementing very similar laws, or their laws were kicked out, lawlessness, let's put it this way, their own rules and regulations. Another thing is why I compare what we are observing right now. During the Soviets in Poland, 50,000 communists were ruling over 36 million Poles. 50,000 could break any law they wished, could do anything they wanted. They did not follow their own regulations and rules. They were listening to European radio. They were watching American movies. They were importing stuff that was illegal for the rest of us slaves. So they don't follow their own rules. And you saw that in your country, and I saw that in my country. The ministers that implemented mandates and regulations, they went partying, breaking their own rules. You couldn't see your brother for coffee. You couldn't see your grandma dying in a hospital, but you could throw a party if you were a politician. Officers of the law, so-called peace officers, when they show up, peace is gone. They were not following their own protocols. They were not following their own mandates. Hypocrisy, double standards, one law for me, one law for thee. That's why I call them the names that I'm calling them. I'm not just throwing names for the sake of, reaction. I'm calling them by their rightful titles. You act like a Gestapo, sir. You are Gestapo. You act like a KGB communist. Yeah, I'll call you KGB communist. You act like a psychopath, I'll call you psychopath, simply because I want you to understand that we see clearly what your intentions are, what you're doing. And people will come to me and say, well, I got a job too. I have children. I need my pension. I need my salary. I got a mortgage to pay, right? I need to feed my kids. Is that not what we heard during the Nuremberg trials? Well, I was just following orders. I was
Following
just
orders,
doing what I was told, right? I mean, I'm sick and tired of those excuses. No, no. One day, for everything you have done, you will be accountable. And maybe not on this side of eternity. But I'm telling you, as a pastor, as a clergyman, one day you will stand before the judge that does not take any bribes. You will stand before the judge of judges, and you will be found guilty for what you have done to other human beings.
Well, I'll tell you what, Pastor, I mean, that's why we wanted to have you on the show, because you speak clearly, you speak boldly, and that's what's needed. That, quite frankly, that's what's needed now. If you're just joining us, you're with the front line with Joe and Joe. Pastor Arthur Pawlowski up in Canada, Alberta, Canada. He's standing up and speaking out against tyranny that was being imposed on him and his church by the Trudeau regime. Joe Resinello, where do you want to go?
Pastor Art, you've been arrested a number of times. I want to focus on the time you spent 51 days in jail. You gave a speech to the Canadian truckers. If you ask me, they're heroes. They were, driving across Alberta. Tell us about that situation. Tell us also about what the government did to them, because they definitely crossed the line on that one. That one blew me away. And I'll be honest with you, how they basically got involved with the banking. Talk about that. And to be honest with you, what shocks me is how didn't that open the eyes of the Canadian people? Because it should. Like, irregardless of your political identity, that was sheer power being put forth. And it should scare people, because you're next. Please tell us about that.
Well, I said that to the Canadian people for many years. I mean, I was arrested 16 times, over 100 court cases, and over 340 citations. So sometimes I spend more time in the court than in the church under this regime, the Castro regime behind the Iron Curtain, as I call it in China right now. So what happened was people's eyes were truly open. If you remember, we had over 1 million people joining the truck convoy. And of course, because I have become, as they called me, the Canada's pastor, the freedom pastor, I was asked to conduct a series of church services for the truckers. When you look at the solidarity movement, when you look at any peaceful non-compliance revolution, either in the United States of America, the civil rights movement, or during Mahatma Gandhi in India and South Africa, you see that it was done peacefully by religious people, really people that didn't want to turn to violence, people that were turning to faith and hope. So I was asked, we had 15 to 20,000 people on the streets of Calgary every single week, and it scared the government. I was asked by the truckers to conduct those church services and to feed them, and that's what I do. I feed thousands of people on the streets of Calgary every single month for 24 years. So I was asked if I can do a grill for the truckers or some kind of a food. So we did that. I did a service in the evening. I did another one in the morning. Off they went to Ottawa. It was absolutely beautiful. People were crying. People were hugging each other. It was amazing. I stayed behind because we had another movement going on in Milk River and in Coutts. That's the border between Montana and Alberta. So I was asked to become their pastor, to go over there and cheer people up as well. So I did. I took my son, my oldest son, Nathaniel. I took my worship leader. We had Lord's Supper in Milk River. There was a lots of people over there. And I'll tell you what I saw. I saw people of every background, every creed, if you will, every color, young, old, women, men, it didn't matter. They brought their cats and their dogs and their horses. I saw people hugging each other, crying with each other, praying with each other, loving each other, singing with each other. It was like the most beautiful family reunion I've ever seen on the soils of this land. And then I did another church service. I went through a barricade. Of course, they opened the barricade for me, and the RCMP is like your FBI. they videotaped me and they took pictures and they recognized me right away. And I asked if I can go to Quds, to the border, to do another church service. They opened the barricade and they let me in. So I went over there. We did Lord's Supper. We were singing hymns. We did sing, national anthem. And then I gave a speech, 19 minutes speech. Here's what I said to Canadians. And here's what I say to you today, because I did not change. My God is not a schizophrenic God. He does not change his mind every 5 minutes because of the political pressure or because of mainstream propaganda media or money. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And here's what I said to Canadians. Listen, I'll paraphrase the 19-minute speech. I grew up in Poland. I saw solidarity movement. I saw the power when people united peacefully. This is a peaceful revolution. No guns, no swords. Stand up, roar like lions. Do not quit. Do not quit. Why? Do not quit for the sake of the children. Because what kind of a nation are we going to leave behind? Today, we are making this decision. Do not quit. Quit. Stand up. And that's what I said. And I repeated 3 times that this has to be done without violence. This is our Alamo. We have to be willing to die for what we believe in, but we don't want to kill. So anyway, no problems. People loved it. We had a supper after, and no problems. RCMP was monitoring us, and so what? I have nothing to hide. It was a sermon. It was a speech. And I'm proud of it. I remember when I was in prison, the Crown prosecutor, that pathological liar, Stephen Johnston, here from Alberta, he was pressuring me to say I'm sorry, to plead guilty to a little charge so they can have their front story page. Pastor Artur Pawlowski, the one that became a symbol of freedom internationally, he pleads guilty. We told you he's a criminal. That's what they wanted. So they put me in solitary confinement. They stripped naked me. They put me in metal cages. They would drag me from my solitary confinement to another solitary cell on concrete, no water, no washroom. 45 days I spent like this. It was insanity at the highest level. I was arrested by a SWAT team, RCMP, detectives, Calgary police, uniformed Calgary police, undercover, special videographers from the RCMP. It was a gong show. I was interrogated for hours and thrown in prison. 45 days later, when I finally said to them repeatedly, I'm not pleading guilty. I have done nothing wrong and you can kill me. And they've tried. There's 5 different inmates that already testified that the guards were giving them incentives to murder me or at least to severely beat me up in prison. And I still said no. I was actually a hero in prison, if you will. Wherever I was showing up, the inmates were yelling, "Free Pastor Art, free Pastor Art. If anything happens to this man, watch your back." I mean, it was incredible. So the sheriffs, without telling my wife, my family, my lawyers, 3 weeks they denied me access to my legal counselors. After 45 days, they came and they literally kidnapped me, shackled my feet, my hands, and they took me to a city hundreds of miles away from my lawyers and my family, and they placed me in MaxPod, which is for the most dangerous terrorists in the country. So I was there, freezing conditions, minus 25. It was horror movie. I was only let 30 minutes out. So I called my wife and I said, tell my lawyers, I don't think I'm coming out. I think they're going to murder me here. I'm freezing. I asked for a blanket. They laughed at me. They said, at least I have fresh air. I think their intention is to murder me here. So do something or you will never see me again. So anyway, next day, the judge heard what was going on and that scared them. So they moved me from a MaxPod to, you would not believe it, to a psych ward without the knowledge of doctors, without any evaluation of AHS, which is Alberta Health Services. Illegal. Everything they have done to me, illegal from the beginning to the end. So I spent there a week, and then eventually a judge ordered them to release me, and I am on house arrest from that day. So almost a year I am on house arrest for my crime. I have been accused of causing Canadian economy over $400 million worth of damages, like a terrorist, for my speech, for my sermon in Quds. Also, I am the first and the only Canadian ever to be charged with this terrorism charge, with this interfering with the crucial infrastructure under the Defense Act. So when you're blowing pipes or bridges, you know, you would be charged with something like this. And also a breach of probation. So I'm facing 10.5 years of imprisonment, and we had the trial already. During the trial last week, the Crown prosecutor not only accused me of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damages for what I said, but he also compared me to Rwanda genocide. He says that what I did, I was inciting people like a person that incites murder. He compared solidarity movement, because during my sermon, I had a hoodie with a solidarity write-up on it. And he says somehow solidarity movement, which we know historically, of course, and I saw it with my own eyes, was a peaceful movement. He says that was inciting violence. You know that this Crown did not call even one witness. His entire case is based on 19 minutes sermon, and he went word by word. I am the first, probably, and the only clergyman in the history of this country that his sermon was word by word scrutinized by the tyrannical government. He said that my sermon alone is a criminal offense, and I should go to prison for that. If I lose, and I don't think that Canadians realize how big is this case, because if they realize how dangerous is this case, there would be tens of thousands of people around the Premier's office or house, tens of thousands, because if I lose, Canada will cease to have freedom of expression and freedom of religion. If I go down, every politician that disagrees with the ruling party is liable. Every clergyman is liable for whatever you say. Every media personality, every comedian, every person that dares privately, because this was a private settings that I said those words. It was recorded. Privately or publicly is liable to be charged with terrorism. That's how dangerous this country has become. I mean, if you would tell me when I emigrated here to my beloved Canada in 1995 that I'm going to be fighting for the for my life and the life of my children, and excuse me, for what? Just because I gave a sermon, I would never ever believe you. I would just not believe you. So how this started? This started with indoctrination and a slow implementation of little laws here and there. It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
Pastor Art Pawlowski is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. This is I'm almost speechless, and I'm a loudmouth Italian guy from New Jersey. Like I'm at a loss for words, because everything you just described, Pastor. If I didn't know you lived in Canada, I would have said you did live. I would have thought they brought back the Soviet Union, or you maybe took a trip to Cuba or North Korea or something like. And the point is this: you have the World Economic Forum, okay, just dying to concoct ways to undermine freedom of speech, whether it's here, whether it's in Canada. They come up with all sorts of legal constructs to try to say, well, of course we believe in freedom of speech, except if it's speech that they don't like. Okay, what do you see? Because in the next segment, we're going to have on Mike McDonald from the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. Okay, and we're going to talk about the spike in anti-Christian. Or basically anti-Christian sentiment, both here and in the UK and Europe and everything else. Freedom of speech is not something that we could take for granted anymore. And the WEF, the radicals in the United States, you're discussing the Trudeau regime and what they did to you for giving a speech. They're going to concoct any way possible to say that what you did, okay, endangered people's lives. Therefore, you don't have the right to freedom of speech. We have a few minutes left with you, Pastor. Talk about that, please.
Well, first of all, you have to understand that every tyrant is afraid of a clergyman or people of faith generally. Why? because those are two competing spirits. We are saying that there is a higher law, so therefore there is accountability. There should be checks and balances. The tyrants say, no, we're gods. We are the pharaohs. We can do whatever we want. That's why there is such a crackdown on people of faith. That's why you have to understand this is nothing new. Around the world, from the beginning to the end, the tyrants, the wannabe pharaohs, hate any man of faith because it's dangerous to them, because it reminds them and people around that there is a higher power, there is a living God, and there is a bigger law. You have to also remember that the first right that always goes down every single time historically, I teach history, so I'm telling you, every time the freedom of religion goes, all of your other rights follow. That's how it starts. Freedom of religion is your Alamo that everyone should be willing to die on. I'll tell you why. Even if you're atheist, if my rights to express my freedom, my faith go, they will go after your rights. Even if you're atheist, even if you don't believe in anything, even if you believe in Martians, like they're trying to, put that garbage on the rest of us right now. If my rights go, be sure of it. That's history. That's not Pastor Artur Pawlowski preaching. That's history. Your rights will go as well. That's why I have always been saying to Canadians and Americans as well, rise up, stand up with me, because if I go down, you're next. So you got to make sure that I am still in a game, in the ring, if you will, fighting, because I am the buffer between them and you. So support me. Like my brother David always says, you supply the bullets, we keep shooting. Of course, I'm talking about words and videos and sermons and food. We're not talking about any sorts of violence. But the analogy stands. You supply us with the means, the bullets, if you will, we keep shooting. We will keep fighting the oppressors for your sake and the sake of your children. Again, if we go down, your children are next. And that's history.
That's right, Pastor. That's right. I'm going to hand it over to Joe. We only, unfortunately, Pastor, we're going to move to the next segment and talk to Mike McDonald along similar lines, talk about freedom of speech and free expression of our religion. Number one, where can our audience members know more about what you have going on? Social media and the whole 9 yards, if you let us know that.
www.streetchurch.ca. Street like a road, streetchurch.ca. And that's our website. And of course, I got other social networks like Facebook, Artur Pawlowski, or Artur Pawlowski TV, YouTube, and other ways that you can watch what I say. You can see the arrest. You can see the whole history of what I have been talking about. Also, you can hear my speech in Quds, for which I am facing 10.5 years of imprisonment.
Well, Pastor, I will tell you this, and then we're going to hand it over to Joe. We got about 3 minutes left, but Joe and I say on the show all the time, the greatest counter-revolutionary act you could commit right now is to open your mouth. Open your mouth and speak the truth. That is, our mouth is our gun. Our words are our bullets, but we're dropping truth bombs. That's what we're doing. Joe, we have about 3 minutes, and then we have to bring on Mike.
Pastor Art, I'll tell you what, God always rises someone up. And you are that guy. He prepared you in Poland for this moment. There is no question in my mind. And there is also no question in my mind that you will be provided for. You will be taken care of. No doubt. No doubt. Whenever you stick your neck out on the line for Jesus Christ, he always comes through. Where there is Christ, there is hope. Do you think, or let me say this, do you know that the Canadian people will turn around and look to the light of Christ? Do you think that will happen? Or better question, when will that happen?
Well, every time, historically speaking, when people have less, then their eyes and their ears are open more. So Canadians, over 50% of Canadians are struggling right now to pay their bills. I mean, it's a disaster at every corner. People are going to start losing their homes. So I hope that they will rise up, join us. I have become a leader of the Independence Party of Alberta. I'm running in this upcoming election in May. Albertans will have a choice this time around, and I hope they're going to choose someone that not only is a fighter, but is also a winner. And I have no intention of quitting. You see, lions do not bow before the hyenas. We eat them for breakfast.
I love it.
it.
I love it.
I love it.
All right. Pastor Art Pawlowski, thank you so much for joining us at the front line with Joe and Joe. You're better. We want to have you back in the future. Keep us posted, everything else. And of course, Pastor, we're going to be praying for you. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.